Hello, welcome to today's episode of Money Talk with Skyler Fleming. I have a great one in store for you today. I'm talking with Rachel Murphy in today's episode, and we're going to be talking about kids and personal finance, especially around teaching them how to handle money. And the money talking points from today's episode are: be aware that there's financial woes facing younger generations that you've never faced before. Let kids experience small financial issues to help them learn to avoid the much larger financial issues. And personal finance is more behavior than math, and that's what we need to teach kids. And then teach a kid money like you would teach them to drive a car. And thank you for listening to today's episode. Please share with a friend and start your money talks today. But let's get right into today's great episode. You know, we don't talk about money enough. It is a topic that gets ignored for some reason, even though it plays a role in everyone's day-to-day life. Well, this issue is what brought Money Talk to reality. I know you're probably busy and don't have much time to research and learn about all things when it comes to personal finances, but that's where this podcast, Money Talk, comes into play. I'm your host, Skyler Fleming. I'm here to do the research and learn all the extra stuff about personal finance for you. The goal is to simply get us talking about money. So let's get talking. Well, what are we going to be talking about today? Well, we're going to be talking about teens and money, kids and money, how you can teach kids money. Well, obviously, we're going to be talking about money. That's the title of this podcast. But what's the impact of today's topic? Well, kids are one of the most impactful people that we have to teach when it comes about money. And it's one of the most impactful things we teach is money, because money plays a role in everyone's day-to-day life. And we all need to understand it, but especially kids, where the economy's growing, prices are going up, things just cost more, financial mistakes have more zeros behind them, and those sort of things. As the economy grows and grows and gets exponentially larger and things like that, it's going to be harder for kids to know, hey, what do I do now that I need to take out $300,000 in student loan debt in order to graduate from college, when that's equivalent to our $30,000 or something like that. I know that's an extreme example, but the point is that the economy is growing, things cost more and stuff like that. So kids have to be ready how to face that and what to do. So how do you implement teaching your kids about money? Let's talk about that next. Well, you're going to learn some great things from the interview coming up with Rachel Murphy. But how do you actually implement those? Let's talk about that first so that you don't get overwhelmed by all the things we talk about. So I want you, if you want to implement some of the ideas from the interview, take one or two of them, 1, 2 at most, because I know there's a lot of things that you could take from what we're going to be discussing today around kids and money. But take 1 or 2 of them and talk about how you can implement them. If you're married, talk about it with your spouse. If you're divorced, you probably should be talking about it with the child's other parent. If you're not married and have a kid, talk about it with a friend. Say, hey, how do you think I could do this with my kids? Like your best friend that knows your kids, like that sort of thing. And I really like the ideas that Rachel's going to mention in today's interview. I can't wait till my wife and I have our own kids so that we're able to teach them some of these methods, because having somebody else to tell about money is always something that excites me. But let's get right into today's great interview with Rachel Murphy. We're here with Rachel Murphy. She's going to go ahead and introduce herself real quick, and then we'll get right into our discussion.
All right. Thanks for having me on, Skyler. My name is Rachel Murphy. I am a mom to 5 kiddos. And, early in our marriage, when my husband and I first got married, we started a business, and things did not go the way we had envisioned. And we got ourselves into a big pile of money trouble. We were like $50,000 in debt, and we had no jobs. And we decided that we were going to pay it off. We didn't know how we were going to pay it off, but we just committed to it. And during that time, we weren't very well employed. We were making less than $30,000 a year, and we managed to pay it off in 5 years. And fast forward to recent times, when we had our kids, I'm like, I don't want my kids to struggle the way I did. So we decided we were going to be very, very intentional about teaching them about money and how to handle it and give them a really good foundation. And so that's what we did. And then about a year ago, 2 years ago, we started a podcast where we teach life and leadership skills for teens. And I kept asking people, hey, what do you wish you'd learned as a teen? And the number one answer was, you guess it. Yes. And so I'm like, well, I know a little bit about that. I can teach that. So I started teaching it in our little Facebook group, and it turned into a book last year. So I recently wrote a book called I Am Not Your ATM, and it's for parents on how to teach your teens to manage money.
That's really cool. I like the title of that. That's really great. It's always interesting how like our money like beliefs and stuff and like where we're at with money always develops from whether our parents were good or bad with it, because I think it usually goes the opposite direction for them.
Yeah. Well,
sometimes so it's about teaching correctly.
Sometimes parents are good with money, but they just don't teach it. Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's the important thing. And I think that leads well right into our first point is, why don't families teach money? Why don't they talk about money? Why do you think that happens?
I think there are more than one reason. Back in my parents' generation, if their parents didn't teach them about money, it was not that big a deal, right? You couldn't get into too much trouble. Like, you can't spend more than you make back then, right? So you had natural boundaries. Like, the bank's not going to loan me any money, if I have nothing to show for it. So they naturally had to learn a bit more than we do now, because we have credit cards that just extend the, how deep we can go. So when my generation was growing up, we were probably the first generation that really, really had easy access to credit cards. And then they would camp out on all the college campuses, and they'd give out free t-shirts and, they've changed that rule. They can still do it, but they can't do it right on the campus. So a lot of people in my generation got into a lot of trouble, and now they're parents and no one taught them. So they don't know how to teach their kids, right? Or they feel like, I'm not really winning at this. Who am I to teach my kids anything? And so they kind of just, it's one of those things that is important, but not urgent. So you can kind of push it down the road and say, I'll deal with it later, but then you may never get to it,
Yeah. I really like your point about how like your parents, like your generation's parents, may not have had to teach it because they didn't need to, like you couldn't go out and get a credit card. But I think there's always something on the horizon that poses a bigger risk to the younger generations than previous. So like now it's crypto and all that sort of stuff that younger kids can get caught up in, where it was credit cards for our parents and things like that. So it's important to have those conversations around money, because I think for me, it's almost like a repeating pattern of, hey, there's this new thing, don't go crazy in it. Like for you, it was, hey, there's these new credit cards, and people went crazy in it and got caught and got in a mess. So I think it is a cycle, and that can be why it's important to talk about it.
Well, I don't think credit cards are going anywhere anytime soon. So so it's important that we teach our kids. And it's not that parents are trying to do anything wrong. It's just they didn't know that this was going to be such a big thing. They didn't know it was going to be so easy to get sucked in, and then it becomes almost generational, because then we see the pattern.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It just leads to my parents didn't talk about money, so we don't. And then it just keeps going. I think more to the point of just having a good like financial foundation, just that your family can talk about it, is a great point to start with. Which leads me to our next point is, how do you naturally like bring up and talk about money with your kids or teens?
You have to make it interesting. I think a lot of parents think they're having conversations about money with their kids, but it kind of sounds like Charlie Brown's teacher. It's like, wah, wah, wah. Because they're either lecturing, which kids don't really get, or they're saying stuff, but it's not relevant. Like I have a friend that said her parents would always say, save your money. But what does that really mean? They never really clarified what that looked like. They didn't talk about IRAs. They didn't talk about interest rates, and anything like that. So she what is she supposed to do? Just pile it up in their savings account, and then it's just sitting there, which is also a really dangerous thing too. So you have to make the conversation relevant to them, and it has to be interesting. So what we do in our family is, when they start to get about 5th or 6th grade, we start turning over parts of the budget to them that are related to them. So like you could start really, really small. Like if your family goes out for ices once a week at the gas station, you could say, oh, instead of me paying for it, I'm going to give you your icy money once a month and you have to handle it. And whenever we go to the store, you start, that's a really, really small way to start. And then you just gradually start adding more categories and give them a salary every month at the beginning of the month. And the goal is by the time they graduate high school, they're handling, 12, 15 categories, from clothes, haircuts, gas, school supplies.
That's really interesting. I've never heard of that tactic. I've heard of like a few different ones, but that one's really interesting to me, is to give them like responsibility over a certain section of the money that the family handles and stuff like that. That's really cool.
Yeah. I think that, it's because you have to find something that they're interested in. Like if it's the mortgage, they're not going to be interested in it. But if it's their clothes, they're going to be interested in it. And I hear a lot of parents complain, I buy them all these clothes and they don't wear them. Well, if you start turning over the clothes, they get a clothing budget every month. They're going to be a lot more mindful about what they buy. They're going to wear it if they bought it, or they're going to return it because they know, money is more finite to them. Right.
Yeah. It's like the whole point of, I think for me, when I was in like high school, the point got brought up a lot. Like if your kid buys their own car, they're going to treat it better. I think that's getting to that point.
Yeah.
So,
we match the car up to a certain amount. But it's like, a lot of families go out to eat, you go out to eat and mom and dad always pay. So the kid they're not even looking at prices really, they're just, we have 5 kids. So like it used to be sometimes we'd have to do the water speech. Okay, everybody get water, and I always felt guilty about that. But then when I turned over they have their own restaurant category, and so it's like, I don't feel guilty about anything because they're handling it. And I noticed that they more often choose water. Right.
Yeah, that's interesting. I really like that idea. I think that one also heads into our next point. Well, is say you're giving your kids those categories and they make just a terrible decision that you knew they shouldn't have, and you tried to warn them. Like, what do you do to help them when they make that stupid money decision?
Right. Well, you let them. The important point is you don't start off here. You have to handle all these categories. You start off really small, and they're little, and you give them 1 or 2 categories, and then every year you give them a salary bump and a more responsibility, so that you're kind of watching to see how they're handling it. You're not going to give them something you're worried they're going to ruin. If you give them school lunches, what's the worst thing that could happen? Oh, they're going to have to pack a lunch, right?
Yeah, or the icy budget, they just buy them all at the beginning of the month and they're stuck without them for a month.
I'm sorry, you don't get an icy when we're all going to go get ice. Something like that. It is so much better to make the mistakes on the ices than the $10,000 credit card bill when you're in college and you went a little crazy, right? I'd rather them learn the lessons at home where it's safer to make the mistakes and we can talk them through it than when. And I think kids need to learn, like parents don't need to lecture so much about, I told you not to buy that, you should have listened to me. They need to learn to make these kind of decisions and feel the freedom and not feel like, what is mom going to think all the time? They need to learn, you don't buy cheap stuff. They need to feel the pain of that themselves, because if we warn them and they don't buy it, they don't really learn that lesson, right? So you have to let it happen, and you have to be okay with not bailing them out. And that's the most important thing, because you're building an adult, you're growing an adult. You're not, they're not going to be a child forever, and you want them to be able to stand on their own 2 feet. So I'm not saying be cold-hearted, but you can say, oh man, that stinks. I bet that's disappointing. You don't say I told you so. Just say, man, that stinks. I bet that's disappointing. Maybe you can come up with some ideas to raise some more money or earn some more money. Like, some of my kids, when they need money, they'll be like, hey mom, can you throw up a Facebook post? I'm going to cook these 3 desserts and I'm going to sell them, and
yeah, it kind of helps them learn how to, like, cause there's a lot of ways as adults we can go out and make a quick buck. So when you teach them those options are there, then I think they're more willing to, like, if they need to in the future as well.
Yeah. I don't like when my kids are little, we do talk about saving, spending, giving, the three categories, which a lot of people do. But it seems like that's where we stop. We don't go any further. And it's not realistic, because what adult do you know that gets their paycheck? They do, they save 10%, give 10%, and they get to blow all the rest. No, they don't. But if we have given them that mentality their whole childhood, and then they become an adult and have to pay all these bills, they're like, this isn't any fun.
Because it's never taught.
Yeah.
That's a good point. So let's go into our next point. What do you think has been more important to you when it comes to succeeding financially? Is it more of a mindset or learning all these skills?
Well, skills is probably about 20%. They say behavior is 20% of money success, right? And the rest.
I think the skills are about 20% behavior. It's more behavior.
Yeah, yes. You don't really have to learn a whole lot. You just have to learn how to put things in place, automate as much as you can. And when we were paying off all that debt, and we were living in the worst neighborhood in town, driving the $1,500 cars, we could have gotten out of that hole a lot faster if our mindset had been right. But we had been so beat down because our business failed. And then this was during the dot-com crash, 2001. My husband lost like 3 jobs in 9 months because he was in tech. So the companies were folding left and right, and he'd get another job and they'd fold. And by the end of that, nobody was hiring. And he drove a cab for about 6 years, and he just felt like a complete failure. And we didn't really believe that we could do any better for a long time. So, back then we didn't have all these podcasts and books. It was pretty much Dave Ramsey, Mary Hunt. There wasn't a whole lot of like there is now. Nowadays, if I found myself in that situation again, I would constantly listen to podcasts just to get my mind straightened out. Personal growth, financial stuff, and throw in a whole lot of action. Like, just get out there and just be like doing things till something sticks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just try, because there's a whole lot of ideas out there, and Dave Ramsey he's one of the main ones that preaches behavior is the majority of it. Like you can know all the best ways to handle your money, but if you're if you're scared to put any of them in place, then nothing's going to stick. So I liked your point about just keep trying things. Something will work. You're going to be okay if something doesn't. Like, you can figure it out. Another point that goes back to the kids is, if a lot of people say, oh, this was never taught to me in school. If the schools would just teach personal finance, does that solve the problem entirely?
I don't think so. The problem is a lot of schools are starting to teach it, but there's no standard right now. Like it could be, oh, I put 5 math word problems in this, and if you were a kid and you're looking at a problem, okay, John took $1,000 to the bank and the bank's paying, 2% interest or whatever. How much does John make in a year, right? Or something like that. That is just a math word problem. That does not change my life.
Yeah, it doesn't teach the behavior of personal finance. It just teaches how to subtract or multiply numbers.
Right. They're not. And then, so they get half a credit or whatever. And then and I think that parents feel like, oh, my kid got it, so we're good. They have done studies on what makes a good financial literacy program. There's a white paper out. I can't remember exactly what it's called. But there's this company called iGrad that teaches financial literacy to college kids. And one of their top people wrote this article, and it talked about the 3 factors that a financial literacy program needs to have to really be successful. And number 1 was it needs to be relevant. So like I said, like if you go in and talk to the kids about retirement, that's too far off for them, really. So I mean, it's important to maybe plant the seed, but it'd be more important to talk to them about buying your first car, or something like that. So it has to be relevant. It has to be interactive, which a lot of programs are not. They're just sitting there listening to somebody lecture to them, right? So if you set up, if you do what we do with our kids, where they have to, figure out their budget. I give them, hey, this is how much you're getting for the month. This is what I suggest you put in each category, but you can do whatever you want. You can move stuff around. And every month they do that. They're interacting with it. They're thinking things through. The last factor was it needs to be repetitive, which a lot of these programs are not. It's just a one and done. And so, you may have learned one thing about it in 10th grade. Well, you're not going to remember that when you're in college, right? So the thing I like about the way we do it, I first learned about this. I don't know if you've ever heard of Mary Hunt, but she was really popular in the 90s. Cheapskate Monthly. She had a newsletter called Cheapskate Monthly. And she actually taught her kids this way. And I read the book when my first kid was like 3. And I'm like, this is what I'm going to do. This is awesome. And then I forgot about it. It was in the back of my head. And then when I got teenagers, it popped back in my head. I'm like, I've got to go find that book. And so I read her book again, but it didn't have a lot of real detailed, it just said general ideas. So I spent hours and hours writing out here. Let's make some budgets and worksheets and all this stuff. So what I love about this is they're learning about budgeting. They're learning about reconciling. They're learning about sinking funds. Because, a lot of people, they get to be adults and they don't think about insurance. And then every 6 months it slams them upside the head, yeah. So if you girls, especially the haircuts are expensive, but they don't have them every month. So they learn, I got to put a little bit aside every month. So they learn about sinking funds. They learn about, how do I reconcile this again? So that months and months and months of doing that, you're going to get it down. If you don't teach your kids this, and then all of a sudden in college, they're on their own and they've gone from having nothing to reconcile to, oh my goodness, there's 100 entries on my debit card, that's a little overwhelming to be thrown into that. It's kind of like when you learn to drive a car. Most people, we take our kids out to a church parking lot and then they drive around, and then we go to a subdivision, and then we go to a street that's not very busy, and then we go into town, and then we go onto the interstate, right? So the way most people teach their kids money is they kind of do the parking lot and then they throw them out on the interstate. There's nothing in between. Yeah. And
there's no ramp or anything. Mm-hmm.
Most young people are not going to go ask for help. They're not going to ask their friends, hey, how do you budget? They're just going to fake it because it doesn't look cool to be nerdy and ask for help.
Yeah. And how do you talk about money? Because most people don't, it never gets brought up in friendly conversations.
Right. And they're trying to figure out, how are all my friends going out all the time and doing all, and so they're just
everyone's broke, but they just see each other going out to do it. So they're like, oh, they must have money.
Yeah. So, they're faking it and then they're getting in trouble. So why, think about all the years that people waste digging themselves out of debt. If we can prevent that, and I want my kids to have good marriages and strong families when they get out on their own. And it's the leading cause of divorce, or one of the leading causes of divorce, is money trouble. So, if we can just eliminate that whole stressor in a young person's life, and then they.
Yeah. Like the first 6 years that they're an adult where they don't know how to handle money. If we can just get them right to the point where they know what to do, life can be a lot, they can get to financial independence quicker. They can have a more simple, peaceful life instead of worrying about debt.
Yeah. Most people don't start investing until their 30s. So just think 15 years, if you had a 15-year jump, what could you do? You could probably retire decades earlier, right?
That's one of the things I consider myself so lucky about is I was telling you earlier with my credit union job, I got exposed to money and money problems very early. So I don't know. I'm very lucky to be in a situation where people are I wish I would have done this when I was younger, because I am younger. So that's one of the whole points of this podcast, is to just help people have a conversation to get started sooner and things like that. Well, thanks. Yeah. You taught me a lot on this. I don't have any kids, and I appreciate you teaching about that and giving some strategies and pointers to the audience. And I'm sure they would love to follow up with you or follow you online or check out your podcast. How can they find you online?
I'm going to set up a special page just for your listeners. If you go to rachelmurphycoaching.com/money talk, I will set up some freebies. I'll have like a spending tracker you can download. So if you're like, that's a really good idea, what would be my first step? What I would do before I even talk to my kids, I would just start writing down ways I'm spending money on them just to get an idea of what I could give them as a budget, right? So like, oh, I went to Target and bought a pair of jeans, just write it down. We went out for ice cream and this is about how much it costs. And just spend a couple months doing that and seeing, how much you really do spend on your kids. Because it's, yeah. I mean, and the beauty about this is you can, even if you have a thrift store budget, you can still do it, right? You just have different budgets. So I'll have that on there, and then I'll put on my top 3 recommended finance books for teens, the ones I love the most. And then there'll be a link to our podcast for life skills for teens and a link for my book on there. So
awesome. Well, yeah, I'll make sure to put that link in the show notes for anyone who's interested. I appreciate you putting that together. I'm sure there will be plenty of beneficial information, especially that tracker sounds really nice, because I think one of the first steps before you even like jump into budgeting is tracking, because you got to know like where your money's going and how much money you're making. So I think that'll be a great resource for everybody. And I appreciate you coming on the podcast. I like to keep things short so people can listen to it in like snippets and then discuss it. So thank you to Rachel Murphy for coming on. Well, thank you for listening to that interview with Rachel Murphy. I thought it was great. And I really thank you, Rachel, for coming on the podcast. But what were my key takeaways from that interview? Well, the first one is that there's always going to be something on the horizon that older generations don't get, and that can lead to financial hardships for younger generations. Rachel mentioned it was credit cards for her. Her parents didn't understand them because when you needed to pay for something in her parents' generation, they just had the money for it, sort of thing, and things weren't as expensive. But credit cards start coming out, and now the younger generations had to worry about financing things. And now, even for me, the people younger than me are dealing with crypto and putting their money in get-rich-quick schemes and things like that, which have always been around, but crypto especially, and all the big promises it makes and things like that, is going to be the financial hardships for the next generation. And I'm sure something else crazy will come along after that we don't understand. But the other thing is that we need to incorporate kids into handling the budget, so that when those credit card offers come at them, and when they're faced with trying to make money and save it and those sort of things, because there's more to it than just save 25% and spend the rest of it. But you need to start incorporating your kids into a budget, like handling snacks, treats, clothes, those sort of things, and make them aware of prices. Another thing is let the kids experience the small problems. That way they can avoid those large financial issues. It's a lot easier to say, hey, you can't get any more slushies for the rest of the month because you spent it all on the 5th of the month. Then say, hey, you're getting evicted from your apartment because you spent all your money on the 1st of the month and your rent was due the 3rd, or something like that. So let them experience those small things that are just detrimental to a kid's life, rather than the large things that are actually detrimental to an adult's life. And there's more to money than just the math behind it. Rachel talked about how personal finance classes are story problems and they're just math classes, and how it's more than that. And I completely agree. It's personal finance, not math 501 or something like that. Like there's a lot more to money than just the math behind it. And you need to teach kids how to handle money like you teach them how to drive a car. Rachel used the situation of teach them in a parking lot, teach them on city roads, a highway, then an interstate. With money, we tend to take kids from the small parking lot with their $1 they earned from their lemonade stand to, okay, go get a job now and make $600 a month. And that's kind of the money that kids have never seen in their life. Then they spend it all, and then they get more money and they spend it all, and they never learn how to handle those larger, faster speeds of money. But there was a lot of great tips from today's interview, and make sure you check out Rachel online and see how she can help you even more. She mentioned that she has a page for everyone who listens to this podcast. You can go to rachelmurphycoaching.com/moneytalk to find some more resources from her. But let's wrap up today's episode, and thank you for listening. Well, this podcast continues to grow and grow, and that's because of all of you great listeners. And I would love to start doing some episodes where I interact with your questions and situations. I love problem solving, especially when it comes to personal finance. So please email me your questions or situations to moneytalk@skylerfleming.com. You can also contact me through the website, moneytalk.skylerfleming.com. And you can always find us on social media with the same handle, moneytalk.skylerfleming. So I'd love to hear any situations you're currently going through, or financial challenges or questions you're facing. So please let me know, and I would love to talk through them on the show. Another thing I'd appreciate is if you could consider leaving a 5-star review if this podcast has brought you any value. And I know this music has brought me plenty of value because I think it's a jam, but I would really appreciate it, and the reviews will be the next step to helping this podcast grow. But thank you for listening to Money Talk with Skyler Fleming. I'm your host, Skyler Fleming. Have a great week.
Thank you for listening to Money Talk. The Money Talk show is provided for informational and entertainment purposes and should not be used for personal or specific financial advice. Every situation is unique and different. Please make sure to do your own research for your personal financial situation.